Okay, let's read Rambler number 11 for Tuesday, April 24th, 1750. The title being The Folly of Anger, the Misery of a Peevish Old Age. There's some Latin here that I'll skip, and then we go to a quote. Yet, oh, remember, nor the god of wine, nor Pythian Phoebus from his inmost shrine, nor Dindymene, nor his priests possessed, can with their sounded cymbals shake the breast like furious anger. Francis. The maxim which Perandir of Corinth, one of the 7 sages of Greece, left as a memorial of his knowledge and benevolence was, "Be master of thy anger." He considered anger as the great disturber of human life, the chief enemy both of public happiness and private tranquility, and thought that he could not lay on posterity a stronger obligation to reverence his memory than by leaving them a salutary caution against this outrageous passion. To what latitude Periander might extend the word, the brevity of his precept will scarce allow us to conjecture. From anger, in its full import, projected into malevolence, and exerted in revenge, arise indeed many of the evils to which the life of man is exposed. By anger operating upon power are produced the subversion of cities, the desolation of countries, the massacre of nations, and all those dreadful and astonishing calamities which fill the histories of the world, and which could not be read at any distant point of time. When the passions stand neutral, and every motive and principle is left to its natural force, without some doubt of the truth of the relation, did we not see the same cause still tending to the same effects, and only acting with less vigor for want of the same concurrent opportunities? But this gigantic and enormous species of anger falls not properly under the animadversions of a writer whose chief end is the regulation of common life, and whose precepts are to recommend themselves by their general use. Nor is this essay intended to expose the tragical or fatal effects even of private malignity. The anger which I propose now for my subject is such as makes those who indulge it more troublesome than formidable, and ranks them rather with hornets and wasps than with basilisks and lions. I have, therefore, prefixed a motto which characterizes this passion, not so much by the mischief that it causes as by the noise that it utters. There is in the world a certain class of mortals known, and contentedly known, by the appellation of passionate men, who imagine themselves entitled by that distinction to be provoked on every slight occasion, and to vent their rage in vehement and fierce vociferations, in furious menaces and licentious reproaches. Their rage, indeed, for the most part, fumes away in outcries of injury and protestations of vengeance, and seldom proceeds to actual violence, unless a drawer or link boy falls in their way. But they interrupt the quiet of those that happen to be within the reach of their clamors, obstruct the course of conversation, and disturb the enjoyment of society. Men of this kind are sometimes not without understanding or virtue, and are therefore not always treated with the severity which their neglect of the ease of all about them might justly provoke. They have obtained a kind of prescription for their folly, and are considered by their companions as under a predominant influence that leaves them not masters of their conduct or language, as acting without conscience and rushing into mischief with a mist before their eyes. They are therefore pitied rather than censured, and their sallies are passed over as the involuntary blows of a man agitated by the spasms of a convulsion. It is surely not to be observed without indignation that men may be found of minds mean enough to be satisfied with this treatment, wretches who are proud to obtain the privilege of madmen, and can, without shame and without regret, consider themselves as receiving hourly pardons from their companions, and giving them continual opportunities of exercising their patience and boasting their clemency. Pride is undoubtedly the original of anger, but pride, like every other passion, if it once breaks loose from reason, counteracts its own purposes. A passionate man, upon the review of his day, will have very few gratifications to offer to his pride, when he can consider how his outrages were caused, why they were born, and in what they are likely to end at last. Those sudden bursts of rage generally break out upon small occasions, for life, unhappy as it is, cannot supply great evils as frequently as the man of fire thinks it fit to be enraged. Therefore, the first reflection upon his violence must show him that he is mean enough to be driven from his post by every petty incident, and he is the mere slave of causality, and that his reason and virtue are in the power of the wind. One motive there is to those loud extravagancies which a man is careful to conceal from others, and does not always discover to himself. He that finds his knowledge narrow, and his arguments weak, and by consequence his suffrage not much regarded, is sometimes in hope of gaining that attention by his clamors which he cannot otherwise obtain, and is pleased with remembering that at least he made himself heard, that he had the power to interrupt those whom he could not confute, and suspend the decision which he could not guide. Of this kind is the fury to which many men give way among their servants and domestics. They feel their own ignorance, they see their own insignificance, and therefore they endeavor, by their fury, to fright away contempt from before them, when they know it must follow them behind, and think themselves eminently masters. When they see only one folly tamely complied with, only lest refusal or delay should provoke them to a greater. These temptations cannot but be owned to have some force. It is so little pleasing to any man to see himself wholly overlooked in the mass of things, that he may be allowed to try a few expedients for procuring some kind of supplemental dignity, and use some endeavor to add weight by the violence of his temper to the lightness of his other powers. But this has now been long practiced, and found, upon the most exact estimate, not to produce advantages equal to its inconveniences. For it appears not that a man can by uproar, tumult, and bluster alter anyone's opinion of his misunderstanding, or gain influence, except over those whom fortune or nature have made his dependents. He may, by a steady perseverance in his ferocity, fright his children and harass his servants, but the rest of the world will look on and laugh, and he will have the comfort at last of thinking that he lives only to raise contempt and hatred, emotions to wisdom and virtue would be always unwilling to give occasion. He has contrived only to make those fear him, whom every reasonable being is endeavoring to endear by kindness, and must content himself with the pleasure of a triumph obtained by trampling on them who could not resist. He must perceive that the apprehension which his presence causes is not the awe of his virtue, but the dread of his brutality, and that he has given up the felicity of being loved without gaining the honor of being reverenced. But this is not only ill consequence of this is not the only ill consequence of the frequent indulgence of this blustering passion, which a man, by often calling to his assistance, will teach in a short time to intrude before the summons, to rush upon him with resistless violence, and without any previous notice of its approach. He will find himself liable to be inflamed at the first touch of provocation, and unable to retain his resentment, till he has a full conviction of the offense, to proportion his anger to the cause, or to regulate it by prudence or by duty. When a man has once suffered his mind to be thus vitiated, he becomes one of the most hateful and unhappy beings. He can give no security to himself that he shall not at the next interview alienate by some sudden transport his dearest friend, or break out upon some slight contradiction into such terms of rudeness as can never be perfectly forgotten. Whoever converses with him lives with the suspicion and solitude of a man that plays with a tame tiger, always under a necessity of watching the moment in which the capricious savage shall begin to growl. It is told by Prior, in his panegyric on the Earl of Dorset, that his servants used to put themselves in his way when he was angry, because he was sure to recompense them for any indignities which he made them suffer. This is the round of a passionate man's life. He contracts debts when he is furious, which his virtue, if he has a virtue, obliges him to discharge at the return of reason. He spends his time in outrage and acknowledgment, injury and reparation. Or, if there be any who hardens himself in oppression, and justifies the wrong because he has done it, his insensibility can make small part of his praise or his happiness. He only adds deliberate to hasty folly, aggravates petulance by contumacy, and destroys the only plea that he can offer for the tenderness and patience of mankind. Yet even this degree of depravity we may be content to pity, because it seldom wants a punishment equal to its guilt. Nothing is more despicable or more miserable than the old age of a passionate man, when the vigors of youth fails him, and his amusements pale with frequent repetition. His occasional rage sinks by decay of strength into peevishness. That peevishness, for want of novelty and variety, becomes habitual. The world falls off from around him, and he is left, as Homer expresses it, and then a bit of Greek, and then it says, to devour his own heart in solitude and contempt.